welcome to How to Deal When the Shit Gets Real podcast. I'm Rieta.
And I'm Connie. And today we're here with Krystyna FalciPena. So Krystyna, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm Krystyna. I've been a Navy wife for almost 4 years now. On top of that, I have a small Instagram/blog about what it's like to be a military spouse and go through chronic illness. Thanks to having lupus, Sjogrens, PCOS, general extra life crap that is hard normally, that's harder when you're a military spouse. And I also work from home, so I'm an awesome admin assistant for a gaming company, which is not what I thought I would do with my graduate degree in anthropology, but I love gaming, so it worked out beautifully.
Oh, nice. You studied anthropology. I like that.
Yes, I love anthropology.
I had an anthropology class and I liked it, but it seemed like every answer I gave the teacher, she'd be like, eh. Like, I was like, but it's right. And she I don't know, like I would just get like the most like, answers like back from her. Like her reviews of my work would be like, nah, you didn't do horrible. You didn't do the best. B. And there'd be like no feedback. It was really annoying, but I really liked the class, just not her feedback.
Oh, it's a hit or miss. It's a hit or miss on like who your professor is. In grad school, they had teachers who would switch out every 2 years teaching a course. And the program I went to, you had to take every kind of anthropology, which you don't always have to do. And I'm a cultural anthropologist, so taking archaeology, when you know nothing about archaeology, is hard. And so one of the professors was on the 2 years I was in grad school. Yeah, not great, terrible instruction giving. And he'd be like, that's not how you're supposed to do it. I'm like, well, then how are you supposed to do it? Tell me. I don't know archaeology. Your instructions were fake.
Help me out here. I had a professor like that. I mean, I guess not like that. I think like there's always that one professor you struggle with. I had a professor that taught biomechanics and he couldn't break it down for you. You know how like you go in with questions and he just re-explain it the same way and you're like, I need you to dumb it down. You're at like professor level. I need like undergrad level. Can you bring it down a notch? And he literally couldn't. And I'm like, bro, I can't. I'm not on your level.
Yeah, history is like that too, because that's my major. My major was history, and I remember thinking like, "Ooh, military history. That's fucking cool. Let's do it. I want to learn about some like wars and shit." And like, it was way more about machinery than I thought it should be about. I was like, why? I don't understand. And he was like very like in history, like in college, it's not very date oriented. It really isn't. Like, yeah, your high school is, but like not most of my college class is not date oriented. This guy very date oriented, and it like just fucked with your mind, basically. That's what it felt like anyhow. I mean, I still did fine in the class, but it was way more work. Anyway.
Now that we've ranted about college professors.
Yeah, all those bad college professors out there. Sorry.
And that's why Rate My Professor exists.
Oh, so true.
So I know you've kind of you've gone through many different, I don't want to just use diseases, but issues in your life.
Yeah, so, journeys.
Yeah.
Diagnosis.
Yeah, there you go. Let's use a nicer word. I don't want to just call you a disease because that's just not nice. Where did we start? Like, was lupus your first thing? What was the first thing? And then did it just kind of cascade or what happened?
Yeah. So the first thing was I was diagnosed with Sjogrens at age 4, which is extremely rare to be diagnosed with an autoimmune disease as a child.
And what is it?
Can you say the name again? I'm sorry, I missed it.
Yeah, Sjogrens syndrome. So it's very similar to lupus. It's an autoimmune disease. It focuses more on smaller joints. So like my carpal tunnel or the arthritis I get in my hands is Sjogrens, dry eyes, dry mouth, like stiff, like really stiff neck. It would get so bad sometimes I couldn't turn my neck. And so that's my mom found out. My mom's a nurse. And so she went on a trip and she came back. And my grandma was like, yeah, I don't know. She was in bed for days. All she did was sleep. Like she didn't have a fever or anything else. And so they did blood work like every week for like months, basically, to to test me for every single thing. And that was the last thing. And that's what it was.
And this is all happening at 4?
Yep, that was at 4.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so autoimmune disease can go into remission. So after like my initial huge flare, which is normally how people get diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, it went back down. And then every once in a while, like I would have a flare. And so like for a while, I didn't really know that there was something wrong with me actually until like I was in high school and I had another big flare like my freshman year. Like so bad the doctors couldn't even give me anything for it. We ended up like in the ER for like IV meds instead.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so that's when I like realized like, oh, and then it went back down again until I was in college. And that is when I like was having really painful joints in my knees. I was always tired no matter how much I slept. And that's when I was diagnosed with lupus at 21, which my older sister also has lupus.
So is that a kind of a natural progression for Sjogrens? Hopefully I'm saying that right. Does Sjogrens usually turn into lupus?
Not always, but they are commonly like together. A lot of people
Oh.
have lupus and Sjogren's, which is funny because diagnosed with PCOS at 14, and I found that there's actually a decent percentile of people who have PCOS and have autoimmune diseases,
Wow.
which I didn't know. I was like, oh, it's most commonly Hashimoto's, but other ones or like something that happens.
And Hashimoto's is thyroid, right?
Yes, my sister actually has Hashimoto's.
Okay. That actually doesn't surprise me because actually one of my very good friends in high school had lupus and she had several other things as well. It seems it tends to hang out
they
with
can
other
bleed
things.
into each other. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's annoying.
It really is.
It's like the joint pain isn't enough, huh? Thanks.
Yeah. It's
Tired
like,
all
let
the
me
time,
think
not
something
enough.
else.
It has to come with more. Thanks.
Oh, it's so bad because like PCOS can also cause fatigue. And I'm just like, people are like, oh, why are you tired? I'm like, I don't know. It could be like one of 5 different reasons of why I'm tired.
Oh, you
Yeah.
poor thing.
I mean, I bet it's even more confusing now that you're pregnant.
Yes.
Because it's like, am I tired because baby is making me tired? Or am I tired because of all these other reasons?
Exactly. All the time. My dad is like, you're tired? And I'm just like, yeah. He's like, why? I'm like, I don't know. Some reason. I'm tired. I'm fatigued. Something.
There's a reason.
Yeah.
I don't
Would
know.
you like the
My
list?
body's doing some interesting things. Yeah. All
do
of
you-
the above is probably the answer.
Yeah, probably. So are you still battling lupus and PCOS? Has it gotten like, I did have a friend that had lupus, but I don't know if there's a cure. Does it get better? What happens?
No. So lupus can go into remission. I permanently have to be on immunosuppressants. So I take Plaquenil, but I'm lucky because that's the only thing I take right now. Some people, like my older sister, has to be on blood thinners. It can attack like different parts of your body. I'm luckily enough to say I currently have no organ involvement, but like 81% of people with lupus have kidney problems. So luckily we haven't advanced that far.
That's good.
My rheumatologist said we caught it pretty early. Like I came in like as soon as I had like an issue, I didn't like brush it off. And so the one time one rheumatologist tried to lower my dose of Plaquenil, my body freaked out. And so now we know I just need to take the 2 every day and never minimize it. And things are mostly fine.
Well,
as
that's
fine as
good.
they can be.
So for people out there that don't know what lupus is, can you give just a little rundown of what it is?
Yeah, lupus is an autoimmune disease that normally is organ involved. You have antibodies from your immune system that attack specific organs in your body. So normally it's kidneys. My sister has it for her blood. So she makes way too thick of blood and causes blood clots. It's a really fun, like random game because lupus doesn't present the same in everyone. But Selena Gomez has lupus, and that's actually why she had a kidney transplant because her kidneys totally were shot from it. And so they kind of try and put you on immunosuppressants to prevent it from getting that bad, or you can go to as high as infusions, like for chemotherapy, to kill your immune system because all the other drugs aren't working to do that.
Wow. So do you think that like these past diagnoses factored in to your infertility?
PCOS definitely did. I don't think lupus has because I don't have blood clotting issues, but people who do, it 100% will.
Yeah. Actually, that's what I think happened with my first miscarriage because we have a blood clotting disorder in our family. And
But yeah,
once
a lot
I
of people don't know.
And once I took the, baby aspirin, because that's what my doctor said, they were like, well, you do have this blood clotting disorder, but you haven't clotted before, but it's affected by estrogen. So you might want to take it. And almost immediately after I started taking the baby aspirin regularly, we got pregnant.
That's so funny. Yeah, I'm on baby aspirin, and it was the first time I got pregnant. But my sister, since she's on hardcore stuff, or some other people I know, they have to do like Lovenox injections, like in their stomach every single day.
They thought I was going to have to, but because I only have one of the genetic things, the genetic markers, I don't have two. If I had two, I would definitely have to, but because I only have one, they're like, you're fine with just the baby aspirin. So I'm lucky, and I did not know that. Like, they assumed that I was going to have to shoot myself with Lovenoxin starting in my third trimester. And then the specialist changed. Yeah, I know, right? The specialist changed their mind, or I saw a different specialist, the fetal specialist, that was like, no, you're fine.
On IVF, like before your transfer, they'll have you start Lovenox, and you'll do it until like 37 weeks. And then I'm like, that's a long time. I'm like,
I don't know how people do it.
Injections.
Well, and then they switch you after 37 weeks to an injection that you have to do twice a day.
I don't know how people do it.
No thanks.
Yeah, and heparin is because it can be reversed on the spot. So if you go into delivery, they can reverse your blood thinning. Lovenox you cannot, which would be really bad if you went to preterm labor.
Yes. So can you walk us a little bit through your IVF journey whenever you're willing to share with our listeners?
Yes. So I am the kind of person who over researches. It's kind of like my thing.
I feel that.
It's a skill.
I am so like that. It's not even funny.
It's a skill and an obsession at the same time. We started trying to conceive right before COVID started. So I did it. I found out you can do preconception visits, which I didn't know were a thing. I feel like everyone should do one. But they basically do blood work run over, like when you want to conceive, what kind of risks you have, general blood work. Especially since I had PCOS, I wanted to do it. So we just like cut off like all my medications, which was terrible. So I was on birth control and spironolactone for 11 years. Both helped me tremendously. And so when I stopped, my body literally lost its shit.
It was it was like, what are you doing?
Yeah, I gained like 25 pounds in a month with no change in the rest of my lifestyle. And I had like really bad swelling because spironolactone is kind of also a diuretic as a side effect. And so I had worse swelling than I do now, pregnant. It was really bad. And so I was like, what am I going to do? Like, I had to temporarily be on a mild diuretic because they didn't think to wean me off the OB's office I went to. They're like, oh, just stop taking it, which was a terrible ida, basically. And so
in reality, you should have been weaned off of it.
Yes. Yeah. And so my primary put me on a diuretic. They're like, okay. They're like, for now, take this and it'll resolve. And it did, thank God. But actually, I was in Florida on a trip. And so I knew I had like, I didn't know because I wasn't taking ovulation predictor kits. I was like running wild and free and knew nothing about what you do, basically. And so I was like, oh, I estimated should have ovulated this day. And so I took a pregnancy test every day. And it was like negative, negative, negative. Then my period should have come that morning and wasn't there. And I was like, okay, we should take another test. And it was a faint positive. So then it was a cheap Amazon test. So then I bought a first response test, negative. And I was like, this must be wrong. And then a few hours later, what I thought was my period started. But then it only lasted for like a day or so. And so I was like, well, maybe they're like, well, maybe you had a chemical pregnancy. Maybe your test was faulty since it was so close to, it hadn't expired yet, but it was going to in like a week. Like maybe it's too close to expiration. So the OB's office brushed it off. And then 10 days later, I started bleeding again. And I was having really bad cramping. I'm like, but I got my period 10 days ago. And they're like, well, that's not a PCOS problem. Maybe you have a polyp or some like built up tissue. It was COVID, of course. So they told me this over a video visit. They even bring me into the office to take a look, like nothing. They were like, oh, well, we'll do a saline ultrasound, but if you're still bleeding, you can't have a saline ultrasound. I'm like, what can we do? And they're like, well, we'll just wait till Tuesday. Saturday came. I was in the worst pain of my life. But you know, when you're used to like chronic pain, you just like brush it off. I'm just like, I'll be fine. I'll be fine. I was shaking and I couldn't eat, but I was like, I'll be fine.
Oh
And I
my
had
Poor
God.
thing.
maybe I know he's like, maybe you should go get seen. I'm like, doctor's office not open on Saturday. Like, no.
And your only option would be ER, which
Yeah, during
that's no
COVID.
fun. Yeah,
Yeah,
during
during
COVID.
COVID.
Yeah,
I
that's
was
not
like,
fun.
no. He had duty, which in the Navy, that means you sleep overnight on the ship for
Duty's the
24 hours
worst.
at least, unless it's your work day afterwards and you're there for like 36 hours. And so he had duty Sunday, so he wouldn't come home till like Monday after work. And he was like, if you don't feel better tomorrow, you should go. I was like, fine, whatever. And I woke up the next morning. I did not feel better. I was like, fine, I will go or whatever. And so I called my mom and I was like, I think I'm going to go to the ER. And she was like, you know, OB's offices have on-call doctors. I'm like, aren't those only for people who are like going into labor or have some kind of pregnancy emergency? She's like, no, if you have any urgent question, you can call them. And I'm like, oh, why doesn't the OB tell you this? Like, they didn't tell me that, like, when I had my video visit on Thursday. They didn't say if things get worse, like X, Y, and Z. So then I called the on-call doctor who I'd never, like, seen before. And she was like, well, because you're bleeding, I don't think it's an ectopic pregnancy because normally by the time you'd be bleeding, like, your tube would have exploded and all this other
God.
stuff. And she's like, but
Thanks for that.
since you're in so
Yeah.
much pain, and I don't think it's that, but since you're in so much pain, just go in. And I said, okay. She's like, and if there's something seriously wrong, I'll end up seeing you there because they'll call me. I was like, okay. So off I went. I actually had a male ER doctor, which honestly, from what I've heard from other people about how male ER doctors have treated them, he was pretty decent. He immediately, when I told him the situation, he's like, no. He's just like, I think you're pregnant. He's like, there's no way. He's like, false positives don't happen that often. I don't know why the OB's office might think that. He's like, no, I think you're pregnant. So he ran like the HCG test like immediately, and he came and he ordered an ultrasound. He did both. He was like, we're just gonna do all of this at once.
Full
So
gambit.
we did an internal ultrasound and then an external ultrasound, which when they did the internal ultrasound, that's when I knew something was wrong. I was like, I've had an ultrasound for PCOS, so I got diagnosed. When I looked at my ovaries, I'm like, I know it's not supposed to be this painful. It's just not. Something is wrong. And so he came back 25 minutes later, like pretty fast, and he was all like, he's like, you are pregnant and your HCG is like 4,000 and it looks like it's a tubal pregnancy that's ruptured because there's all this fluid in your abdomen that we're looking at. And he's like, and so you're probably gonna need surgery, but I'm gonna call your OB now. I was like,
What?
okay, yeah. And like no one's allowed with you because of COVID. So my friend just like dropped me off and she couldn't come in. So I was
You poor
like,
thing.
okay, I'm just alone. And then they finally gave me painkillers. Finally, I was like,
Well,
oh
at least
my
they did
God.
that. That's
Yes.
something.
Yes, they gave me fentanyl, and that's the moment
Ooh,
I
yeah.
decided.
That'll make you
I
feel
was
real
gonna-
good.
Oh yeah, that's the moment I decided when I have children, I'm having an epidural. I
Yeah.
was like, oh no, I definitely gonna need an epidural.
I didn't even need the pain medicine to know I want an epidural. I was like, yeah, no, sign me up. I don't care if they come out drugged. It's fine.
And so I was like, my husband was working, so I let like, I'm actually the ombudsman for my husband's ship, but there's like normally two of us. So I let the other one know, like, hey, let the ship know. She also had my dog, who was like only a 5-month-old puppy. I'm like, let them know that like I have to have surgery. And so they had, my husband was standing a watch. And so they're like, hey, you're going home, your wife is having surgery. And he's just like, what?
What? Yeah.
Yeah, what? So he had to like get home and I'm like calling my mom because I'm like hysterical at this point. I'm like, I've never had surgery. What do you mean I'm just gonna have surgery right now? Like what?
No prep.
So they did no prep, and there's like, luckily I hadn't had food for over 24 hours because I was too much in pain to eat. So that worked to my advantage, at least for surgery. But they had to wheel me to the women's hospital, which is connected via tunnel. And so my OB was supposed to meet me there, and they were like, okay, we're gonna like remove your tube. And I'm like, okay, what's gonna happen if I only have one fallopian tube? Like, what? And they're like, it'll be fine. They're like, what's more important is if like you're actually alive. And I'm like, okay. And they wouldn't let like my husband come in at all. Even like before I had surgery, they wouldn't let him see me. So I was like, what? I just like talked to everyone. They're like, you can call him for like a couple minutes. They're like, but we need you like in the OR like ASAP. And I'm like, okay.
I would have had a
Yeah,
panic
really.
attack. I'd have been like, I need my husband in here right now.
They like
Yeah.
didn't care at all. And then had my surgery, which I guess went well. They didn't have to full cut my abdomen C-section style, so I had a laparoscopic surgery, thankfully. But I
That's
woke
good.
up like at 9 p.m. Apparently, I had been unconscious after surgery for like 2 hours, just like asleep. And they were like, "Okay, great." I was nauseous from the anesthesia, and so they tried like IV nausea meds. Nope. A patch. Nope. Give me some applesauce. I'm like, mildly tolerated. They didn't give me pain medication while I was unconscious, besides like Tylenol. They're like, we're waiting to give you the hard stuff until you woke up. So I woke up in pain. I'm like,
You poor
Dang.
thing.
I'm in pain and I have to pee. And they're like, okay, do you want to go to the bathroom or you want a bedpan? I'm like, I really don't want to get up. And they're like, oh, well, you should get up anyway. I'm like, I don't even know why you asked me.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
clearly
then
did
why
not
did you
have a
offer
choice.
me that?
I clearly did not have a choice. And so then they discharged me the same night. It was 9:40 at night. And they called my husband to come get me,
Oh
which
my
involved
gosh.
them wheeling me to the lobby and me just getting in the car. And that was it.
Wow.
But they didn't send me with any painkillers for overnight or nausea meds. They're like, we wrote your prescriptions. My husband had to go find a pharmacy in San Diego that was open at 10 o'clock on a Sunday.
Which the answer to that is none.
Oh, he found one. There was
Oh,
one that
really?
existed.
Shocking.
It did not take TRICARE though. Luckily, I was still under my dad's insurance, and so they took that insurance. So I was like, thank God I have two insurances right now.
Hallelujah,
like,
right?
Yeah, I only had it for like another few months. I'm like coming in clutch at the last minute.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. So
Yeah.
now my question is, lawsuit? Because
No, I never did. I never did.
I wonder if you would have been able to, just because of the fact that like it didn't really seem like they listened to you.
Yeah,
Well,
and,
they
I never
probably
went
would
to that
just-
office again.
They would probably just be like COVID, and
No,
that
that's
would
not
be
true.
the end of it.
I did end up going to that office again because afterwards I was consulting a fertility specialist. I had one visit before I had this whole scenario. And so they're like, okay, for us to do anything else, we have to see your HCG go down to 0 because then your hormones will go back to what they normally are.
Mhm.
And then we can tell like what you need. And 11 days post-surgery, it was not 0.
Wow.
And I was like, but it was less, but not 0. And I'm like, that's not like a red flag. And they're like, no, it's fine. We'll repeat it. Okay, well, the OB who did my surgery was on vacation. So no other OB looked out for that blood work. So I called the office and I'm like, hey, where's my results? And they're like, oh. So then the nurse pulled it up, even though I guess technically was supposed to consult the doctor first, but they didn't care. They only had one doctor in the office, like at a time because of COVID. And so they were like, oh, they're like, it's perfect. It did exactly what it should do. It doubled. And I'm like, no.
What?
I'm like, I had a surgery for an ectopic pregnancy. It shouldn't double. And she's like, what? I'm like, did you even look at the chart? No, the answer
Oh
is no.
my God.
And she was like, I need to talk to the doctor and let you know. It took her
Do
an
you know
hour
who this
to call me
is?
back. It took her an hour.
Jesus.
It took her an hour to call me back to then say, you need to go to an emergency room. I'm like, well, I could have been at the emergency room.
Yeah,
by
an
now,
hour ago. Yeah.
ma'am. So off I went again, 3 weeks post surgery in an emergency room, for them to do another ultrasound and more blood work, which had again doubled. And the ER doctor was like, they don't let you look at the ultrasound at all. They
Nope.
just like do everything. And so then he comes in and he's just like, have you done any fertility treatment? And I'm like, no. And he's just like, well, from what I can see on your ultrasound, it looks like another early gestational sac in your uterus. And he's like, I've never seen that before. He's like, it's not very common. And he's like, it only really happens in people who've done like IVF or IUI and not like naturally. And I was like, okay. He's like, but he's like, I don't specialize in OB. He's like, so I'm having an OB from your office look at it, which the OB confirmed it. And they're like, okay, we need to get you like a prenatal visit and all this taken over and more blood work. So after that, my next blood work didn't double. It stayed the same. And so I'm like, well, what's happening? And they're like, we don't know.
Oh my
And then my
gosh.
doctor, my original doctor from surgery came back and she didn't like, she was just like, oh, well, it's not doing anything. So you should just get the methotrexate injection, which is normally used for ectopic pregnancies. And it basically like kills everything. So it stops growing. So they normally do that before your tube bursts. And she's like, well, this way, if there's any extra tissue from the ectopic, we can like nip two in the bud. And I was like, no, I'm like, I don't want to do anything until I have an ultrasound. Like, I want an ultrasound and I want to see it and I want to know.
Yeah.
Because she was like, oh, do you want to do methotrexate? You want to have a DNC? And I'm like, okay, don't want another procedure. And I don't want to do anything without like being seen in office and looking, which she obliged by. And then
Just barely, I'm sure.
Yeah, which
from the look on your face, it looks like she just barely gave in.
She was just like, fine. So she moved my ultrasound from the other doctor I was supposed to see to with her because she was going to cancel it altogether. And I was like, no, I want the ultrasound. Like, I want to see. And the ultrasound, she then like, she went in, she looked, she measured everything, and she's just like, this isn't very impressive. And she's like, this must be what they saw. She's like, this isn't very impressive. I'm like, okay. Which my husband also wasn't allowed in for the ultrasound either.
That is a very poor choice of words. I feel like
it really is.
It's not sympathetic at all whatsoever.
And how did this occur? How did we go from an ectopic pregnancy to like is it like a regular pregnancy? Like, I'm not.
Yes, they're twins, where one is a regular pregnancy and one is an ectopic.
Oh, okay, I got it now. Okay, continue.
So I actually know someone who just had that recently. She was an IVF transfer. One of them stuck in her tube. They put two in her uterus, but one still escaped and went to her tube.
That's annoying.
Little crazy.
Yeah, so she had to have surgery to remove her tube because that was the only way to save the other baby. There's no other way to like get rid of the ectopic one without surgery if you want to keep the other one.
Gotcha.
So
okay.
She basically immediately asked me after the visit, she's like, okay, so DNC or methotrexate. And I was like, we'll just do methotrexate because I didn't want to go into another OR or any of that, which was a terrible experience because she acted like, oh, you just go into triage at the women's hospital and they'll do it.
It's fine. Yeah. Like there's no issues. It's fine, right?
It was a 4-hour process.
No.
In the triage of labor and delivery. So you see everyone else around you having babies, like actually there to have a baby, and you were not there to have a baby.
Yeah.
And the 4 hours is just because, oh, well, the lab has to do their own HCG blood work. I'm like, I just had it done with my OB's office. No, they have to do their own blood work. And since I'm not a priority, it takes 4 hours to get the results back. And it did. I just laid on a cot for 4 hours while everyone else was in labor.
Oh my God.
I at least got to bring my husband this time. And then it's 2 shots in your butt, one in each side. And then you have to be on like a strict diet because you can't consume folate because that prevents the injection from working. So no leafy greens, don't eat certain fruit, don't take prenatal vitamins anymore. Like, it's like, okay, I'm like, okay, great. And it worked, thankfully, because they're like, oh, if it doesn't go down a certain percentage, then you have to do it again. And so I had blood work done like from that beginning process in May. My HCG didn't hit 0 till the end of August. So
Oh, wow.
every single week I was in the OB's office doing blood work. Like all the nurses knew me by then because I was just there all the time. They're like,
You
you're a
poor
repeat
thing.
customer. I'm like, this is not why I want to be a repeat customer at the OB's office.
Oh my
No,
God, yeah.
absolutely not.
Did they tell you like why it took so long? Because from my miscarriage, like it went down to 0 within like 2 weeks.
No, they said everyone's different. They're like,
Oh,
everyone's in the,
okay. I was
they're
just
like, there's,
curious.
no, there's like an initial big jump, and then like after that, everyone processes differently. And I was
Gotcha.
like, I'm like, that's fun.
And they're keeping a closer eye on you because of the 2 pregnancies and the issues, I'm
Yes.
assuming. Because they didn't like, they stabbed me twice for blood just to see if it went down. And then if it went down to 0, like the following week, and it did. And so they're like, bye-bye.
Yeah. So they watched it go down. And then they're like, okay, well, now you have to see a fertility doctor because he won't help you. So I went to the fertility doctor they suggested, which I had only met with once. And they were, that doctor, who was terrible, and I've heard other terrible things about this practice since, was like, I don't think you have PCOS. Your labs look normal. And I'm like, I'm on metformin for PCOS. Like maybe my labs look normal because I'm
On
on
something.
medication.
Yeah, because
Uh,
yeah, the medication stabilized you.
Yeah, I'm
oh.
like, I've had an ultrasound. I'm like, I have every symptom of PCOS you can think of. Extra hair, acne, weight gain, polycystic ovaries. Like what else is there not for you? And so after that, I just started like a circle of doctors. I changed OBs, the one I
I
have
would
now,
too.
and he's awesome. Dr. Cobb is the most amazing person. He's a male OB, which I never thought I would want a male OB, but when you go to his office, you only see him. You
Yep.
don't see anyone else. You don't see a nurse practitioner. It is always him. He
It's
does the ultrasound. He does everything besides like the big scans that you have to go to like a fancier place for. Everything else
yeah.
is him.
It's
You
funny
call
you
for a
say that
problem, it's him.
because I had a male OB as well when I had my son, and he was the best. He could tell how big my son was just from feeling my stomach, and I had saw him the week before I had him, and he was within like 3 ounces. Like he knew
That's
his
so
shit.
funny. Yeah, he's awesome. And so he was like, okay. He was like, we can start you on Clomid. He's like, the common treatment for PCOS. So that's what we started with. I was already paranoid by then because I had lost a tube. I had like watched other reproductive endocrinologist YouTubers. I had like watched the people with infertility on Instagram. I like nose dived into like, I'm not going to get pregnant normally, probably. And so I started researching IVF long before, like over a year before we ended up like there. I was like, I need to know everything. I mean, my mom was a fertility nurse when I was like in middle school, so I knew IVF was a thing like at a pretty young age. But like I was like, okay, what's the process? What's it gonna be like? Because I've seen other people who lost their tube who ended up doing IVF. I'm like, okay, well, I'm like, if not, this is just knowledge I have, but I want to be prepared ahead of the game.
Yeah.
So we did 2 Clomid cycles with Dr. Cobb, which I consistently ovulated on the left side, which is the side I do not have a tube. And you're right, fallopian tubing technically grab something from the left side, but my left ovary likes to hide. Like until a certain age, they thought I didn't have a left ovary. It kind of hides behind my other organs. And I'm like, there's no way, obviously, the right tube is going to get anything. You can barely find the left ovary. There were times when Dr. Cobb couldn't find it at all to figure out if it even up if what was on it. He would have to like really put pressure to get it down. I'm like, well,
Wow.
that's not going to work. So then he switched me to he switched me to do another time intercourse cycle, and he's like, if not, we will suggest that you go to I'll suggest a fertility clinic. You can talk to them, like they do this obviously all the time. And I was like, okay, that's fine. I'll do that, I guess. I'll trust you. He suggested 2 different clinics. I called both of them. one was like way more expensive than the other. One was actually near close to Camp Pendleton. It was Oceanside. And so I was like, okay, well, I don't think I want to go quite that far. So we just didn't do that route. We just kind of like kept going on the timed intercourse cycle like repeatedly. I just kept doing it. I don't know what, like, come to it now. I feel like I did way too many than I should have because I went to the cheaper doctor, and basically what she did was she just kept putting me in time intercourse cycle. She never recommended IUI. She never recommended IVF, and I was like, this isn't like working. So like, why aren't we like
moving forward?
Yeah, like why aren't we suggesting IUI? Like, what are my other choices? Like, I don't know what they are. I don't know anything about it.
Yeah, you're the doctor. You tell me.
Yes, exactly. I'm just like, please help me, because we basically what we did at the other clinic, we switched to letrozole, and so that technically has more success with IVF and less chance of twins of multiples. Same situation, left tube, left side, left side, left side, left side, and so 6 times intercourse cycles later, had nothing to show for it. And so I like had come to Florida with my husband after our last one, like, when we were still waiting to figure out what was going to happen. And I was like, I literally looked at him like, if this doesn't work, I am recommending myself for IVF. Like, I do not care. I'm recommending myself because I do not have time for this anymore. It is not working. So I signed myself up for like 500 different doctors because I'm like, I'm interviewing doctors the way people interview for a job. I am done. And so
good for you.
I went to a clinic in Oceanside, and he was like, I think you're right. He's like, I don't think you necessarily have PCOS. And I was like, well, that's annoying because you're wrong. But he was like, I do. He's like, diagnosis doesn't matter though. He's like, IVF is IVF, and we do your drugs based on what your hormones are at the time of the cycle. And he's like, he's like, it takes there's certain things we want you to do for IVF, like if you're a genetic carrier for anything, which we had never done. And so I was like, okay. He's like, that takes a few weeks to come back. He's like, so I would suggest you do injectable meds with timed intercourse. And I was like, okay. He's like, TRICARE covers them if they're for timed intercourse. And I was like, okay, fine. My right side finally ovulated for once. Still didn't work. So I was like, okay.
Well, I mean, one step in the right direction, right? The right side is not sleeping anymore.
The right side did something. And so I started calling around. So I made an appointment with CMY Colorado, another clinic, Conceptions in Colorado, which has high success rates. A clinic that I ended up going to that was recommended to me, and that is New Directions in Arizona. And a lot of military spouses I knew were successful and had gone there. And they were successful off their first transfer, and it was similar pricing rates to CMY, but closer to me. It's a 5-hour drive, and a higher success rate actually. And so I nosedived into all these people, and I ended up finding out the doctor from New Directions. He has a podcast, which is awesome because he talks about all kinds of things about IVF and infertility and like your natural cycle. And so I listened to his podcast, and I decided by that, before I even spoke to him, I'm like, I like his personality. Even though he was the second last consult I could schedule with. It was like the end of July, and CMY was going to be in August, which I ended up just like canceling CMY because their Colorado success rate was only like 35. Who's gone to CMY has not gotten pregnant off their first transfer. So I was like, that's a lot of traveling for that. So I did New Direction. When I met him like over my Zoom call, I was like, nope. I'm like, he sounds exactly like he does in the podcast. He's like just as nice. He like never cared about like questions. Like most doctors would ask me, like, well, what do you know about IVF? And I'd be like, well, I know this, and I know this, and I know this, and I know this. I was like, oh, okay, you know a lot. And I was like, yes. And so I was like, nope, we're going here. That's what we're doing. We're going here. And so, but with my husband being in the military, they get booked up in advance because they like to batch their cycles, which means everyone goes through egg retrieval in the same 2-week period. Everyone starts stims and does the retrieval like in the same week. So they consolidate their appointments, which probably helps save money. I was like, okay, that's fine. But I was booking in July, reserving a spot for a retrieval in October. I did not know if my husband would be there, and he actually came back for his underway like a few days after I went to Arizona. So we had taken the trip at the end of July, like shortly after our consult, to drive all the way out there just to freeze his sperm in case he wasn't going to be there. Because I was like, there are like zero guarantees. He can get his
it's
leave
military.
kit signed. Yeah, he can get his leave kit signed until the last minute. I was like, I don't know if he's going to be there. I bought my mom a plane ticket. I'm like, someone has to come with me because you have to have a driver afterwards.
Right.
I rented an Airbnb that had a yard so I could bring my dog. And luckily I worked from home. So I just got to kind of work, and I kind of just let them know like close to my retrieval date is when I will stop working. That's when I will like be probably very uncomfortable, which I was, and I will drop off the face of the earth. Luckily my retrieval was like on a Saturday, so I got to like the end of the week almost, and I was like, okay, bye.
All right, I'm uncomfortable.
And they were super nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were like super nice about it because like I would get like really bad headaches from all the estrogen, which I even did after transfer, because you have to be on estrogen. Estrogen and I don't agree when it comes to extra of it. So I was like uncomfortable. Luckily my husband went, but Dr. A was super great the whole time because I'm the kind of questioner. They don't like volunteer everything. They're like, okay, your estrogen looks good. This is what you're doing with your dosage. I'm the person who was like, what exactly is my estrogen level? But I could just ask my mom, like, okay, what does that mean? Is that good?
Yeah.
And when they raised Gonal F instead of one of my other drugs, I would be like, so why this one and not this one? Like I would ask those kinds of questions.
That's good though. You should ask those kind of questions, especially when it's important like that.
Yeah, so a lot of people like don't know why things happen, and so my clinic sets up Facebook chat groups with other people who would like to participate who are retrieving around the same time as you, like in that week. And so I ended up answering like a lot of people's questions, because a lot of people, which I didn't know, go into IVF and they're paying all this money, but they haven't researched it at all.
Yeah, not everybody wants to know all of the information, which I find odd as well.
And then they wait until like they're actually going through it and they're like, wait, why is this happening? Or why this and why that? And I'm like, you invested 10 grand and you don't know. And I had a friend like that I worked with that we met virtually. We've met once in person since, but she ended up going through stims and egg retrieval with CMY like the same exact time as me. Now, it was way sooner than she thought she'd be doing IVF, so she knew like nothing. She was like, help me. She didn't know anything. And so I'm walking her through it at the same time.
Yeah, so that's how I was with my miscarriage, is that like I wanted to know everything about it and then everything to avoid it.
Oh yeah.
And then I like learned way too much about like ovulation and getting pregnant. I was like, I know my mom called me and was like, I wonder if you could like help your cousin get pregnant. And I was like, I don't know their history and I'm not a doctor. I just know what worked for me, Mom. I can't, like, I'm not their doctor. They need to consult a doctor. If they've been
certain like vitamins that will help you when you can try ovulation predictor kits, but besides that, it's like, okay, bye.
It's still like, I'm not your doctor. And they don't really, this particular cousin doesn't really advertise that they're trying, but they've been trying for a while. And I'm like,
a lot of people don't.
It's up to them. It's up
Yes,
to them to
it's so
go
funny how much
to a
people think.
doctor.
It's funny how so many people, like my dad, after like I had gone through my surgery, he's like, I didn't even know you were trying to have a baby. I'm like, why would I tell you that?
Right.
Like,
It's not
that's
really
not the
any of your business.
information. It's not really information people necessarily like want to volunteer.
Right.
And then afterwards, like I didn't volunteer all of like my time to intercourse cycles with my family. I mean, I did with my mom because my mom's also a nurse with a background in it. But
Right.
like other people, no. I did on Instagram publicly because, there's a whole community of people doing the same exact thing.
Yeah.
But that's different. Like I'm not advertising to like
Yeah.
everybody like, hey,
You're not
this-
giving, intimate details. You're giving
yeah.
what's happening, but you're not telling every little intimate detail.
Yeah. And like when I did IVF, like we did advertise because we did fundraise some of the money because
It's
before we even
expensive.
chose the clinic we did, yeah, because like the clinics in San Diego with military discount were gonna be like 20 grand, not including meds. So like I was like, okay, like this is what we're doing. And so we raised about half of what we actually needed. And then we took our own savings and a loan out for the rest. So it's like 10 grand total, and that includes all our trips, so gas, lodging, food, meds,
It really,
actual cycles.
it really is a shame that insurance doesn't cover stuff like that.
It
Because
is.
it's not like you chose to
It's
have
so
to deal
funny
with
though
infertility.
because most of all the other people that I was going through retrieval with were from Arizona, were from the Phoenix area, and their insurance has covered it. Like almost everyone else. I'm like, so like ended up needing an extra medication because I stimmed longer than average, like almost 2 weeks on stim medication, which isn't usual already. But I also have PCOS, and those people actually tend to stim for less periods of time. But I think since we started off really slow to
Yeah.
prevent hyperstimulation, that it took longer. And so she gave me one of her leftovers. She's just like, my insurance covers it. She's like, I don't
Oh,
care to
that's
save it
nice.
for another cycle. Like, take it. And so
Well,
that
that
was
was
like
nice.
that was another $100-something that I didn't have to spend because it adds up to have to go to a fertility pharmacy last minute and go get it. You
Yeah,
don't have
yeah.
time to shop around.
So did the first transfer work?
It did.
Woohoo!
We went a couple weeks later. I almost thought my transfer was going to get canceled because my lining, I guess, gets pretty thick pretty early, but they're like, it's too thick. Like, we don't think you shed your old lining enough. And I'm like, don't make me have to wait for another period. Like, I
Please
transferred in
don't do this to
November.
me.
Yeah, I transferred
Put
in
it in
November,
there.
and I'm like, December would be a terrible time with Christmas and traveling around that time of year.
Oh my
It's
God, yeah,
not what I
really.
want to do. And so we actually transferred on Veterans Day, ironically.
Oh,
And so my husband got to go. We spent like a short weekend. We didn't bring our dog this time. And so we actually really love the Arizona area, which we've never got to explore beforehand. Like, we'd never been to Arizona before IVF. Like, we went there knowing nothing about it, which is funny because I'm like, well, that's one of the few pros is that we saw a new place that we actually really like, and we're like I could live here. Like, I could live here actually, surprisingly. And so we transferred 2 embryos on Veterans Day, and now we're having twins. So luckily it
Yay!
worked. That 65% success rate for them on the first transfer was correct, and it was 85% if you transfer at least 2, which is why we chose to do 2, because we're like,
it's too
well, the
expensive. We're
extra,
doing this once.
yeah, the extra 20%, like your first transfer is free. It's included with your IVF cost. After that, you have to pay 2 grand. So I was like, I would like to not pay 2 grand, so we will just do 2 and hope at least one of them sticks, because I know at least now 2 other people from that clinic who live in San Diego and they transferred 2 and only 1 stuck. And I'm like, well, that's
You got
what we're
lucky.
gonna do. Yep. So we have 2. It was like a rough journey because all our embryos are boys, which ended up being like a huge shock. They kind of tell you like it's a 50-50 shot, and I'm like, they're not all, it's not that normal. We had 7 usable embryos, six normal, 1 mosaic, and 1 abnormal, and the abnormal one was the only girl. And
Go
I'm
figure.
like, how does this happen? And so like I had to go through gender disappointment before even getting pregnant because I was like, and I found out
Oh,
when my
you
husband
wanted
was
a girl?
gone. I've always wanted a girl. I've always wanted one of each, and I'm like, I have no choices. I'm like, what do I do? I don't want to pay to go
Boy,
through
mom
IVF
life.
again. Like, I want to pay to go through IVF again just to have like a girl. Like, that's ridiculous. Like, no.
Yeah.
I've met people who would do that. But I was like, no. And my husband was gone. So when we found out how many embryos actually made it, he was gone. He was on a ship in the middle of the ocean. I couldn't even call and tell him. I just like got that information alone on my sofa. And I was like, now what do I do?
Well, you
Like,
shouldn't
what?
have to worry about picking. You're like, well, they're all boys. Just put 2 of them
That's
in there.
true. And so now people have asked me, they're like, well, would you do IVF again so you can finally get the girl that you want? And I'm like, no. I'm like, because obviously I'm not going to have 5 more kids because that's what's in the freezer. I'm like, I would make even more embryos. And then what? I'm like, oh, well, you're all in the freezer because you weren't good enough because you're boys. Like, that just sounds terrible. It's like a moral thing you have to think about because
Yeah.
you didn't get pregnant naturally. Like, if you got pregnant naturally, just like, oh, well, it's a
It
boy.
wouldn't
Like,
matter. Yep.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And I'm like, that's like the con of like finding out. But we wanted to find out because I would decide like if we were going to transfer 2 and we had both, we would do 1 boy, 1 girl. So the 50% chance of like if one of them stuck, it could be either gender like normal. So we didn't do that. And so we've kind of decided that maybe we'll try naturally after IVF. I know I know at least 2 people now who have gotten pregnant after IVF.
I do too.
Surprisingly, it took them 4 years in IVF, and then they randomly, not intentionally, got pregnant afterwards.
Yeah, I know a couple people like that as well.
And so I'm like, well, maybe shit will figure itself out. And if it doesn't, we've considered embryo adoption of someone who has extra embryos, who has one that's a girl that like they're not going to use, and that we can do that instead. And then we would in turn donate our embryos to someone who does not have any and can't.
So
there you go.
what advice would you give to somebody who's about to start like their IVF journey? I wouldn't say IVF because I feel like it's a very long process.
Yeah, just like any of your infertility like research is like the best thing. There's so many podcasts now, YouTubers, like about basic things. Like Dr. Natalie Crawford does something as basic as like a video about ovulation. Like some people literally just don't know.
Like maybe know your ovulation cycle, know your body.
I know some people who don't know like how ovulation works, or that the first 2 weeks of pregnancy, or like from your menstrual cycle and you haven't even technically ovulated yet. Like there's so many women that we're not taught this in school. I mean, you think you would, it's a natural body function. You know, we were taught if you have sex, you'll get pregnant and you'll die, and abstinence is the only way because it's so easy to get pregnant. And then you find out as an adult when you're trying
really
that, like,
not.
That even if you're healthy, normal, and you have sex on your ovulation window, there's still only a 25% chance that you get pregnant. And I'm just like, that's really low for the way everyone made you like freak out for years of your life.
Well, and I think just for, like ovulation, getting pregnant, and actually pregnancy in general, because I'm pregnant too right now. And I feel like half the stuff that happens to my body, I'm like, that was not covered in health class.
Oh my God, nothing. I feel like I learned nothing in school.
I was like, the baby, I get that the baby's growing, but all of the symptoms, no. I'm like, nobody said anything about cramps in your legs. What?
Oh yeah, I've gotten cramps in my legs. What else? Lightning crotch.
I have one right now.
I didn't know lightning crotch was a thing, but I found
God, yes.
I found out it's normal later in pregnancy, but there's 2 of them in there. So I'm just like, one of them is on the nerve that's not comfortable right now. Like, can you please move? I didn't know pelvic floor PT was a thing, which I'm currently doing.
We talked about that. just
They actually
with a guest a few
suggest
weeks ago.
doing it like before you're even pregnant, and I'm like, why does no one tell you this?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why aren't these things advertised?
So
Like,
in
you have to
general,
be your best advocate. Like, number one, during fertility, you have to learn how to speak up because, like, there are so many doctors and they all have their own opinions and way of doing things. And if
mhm.
you don't stand up for yourself or be willing to switch, I see so many people who are like, I'm too scared to change clinics, even though like everything has failed. And I'm like, you go to another clinic. If it fails again, then you know that like it wasn't the first clinic.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Or you take that risk and you could have like a way better like outcome. Like, don't worry about hurting a doctor's feelings. Like, honestly, like,
Just
this is
ghost
their
them. Just
job.
just act like you're
This is
dating
their
them
job.
and ghost them and just be like,
This is their job to help you. Guess what? If they don't do what they're supposed to do, like they don't help you have a baby, which is what you need and want, what you hired them to do, then you fire them the way an employer would fire you if you weren't doing what you were supposed to do.
if it was me,
Absolutely.
I would just be ghosting them. I'd be like, peace. Luckily, I didn't have to do that
Oh yeah, I
because
totally ghosted the clinic that was in Oceanside. I was just like, I'm like, no, we can't afford it. It's too expensive to go through your clinic. I never said like I'm gonna go somewhere else. Like I never said any of that. Like I was like, bye. You always ask for a copy of your records for
yeah,
anything you do.
Right.
Like even with my blood work, like I had a copy. My genetics screen I had a copy. That way, when you actually do want to switch, you have to be like, oh hey, I need you to transfer my records to this doctor.
Mhm.
Like no, you don't have to because I have a giant folder of medical records because Navy life equals moving. So I have all my rheumatologist records. I'm like, this is when I was diagnosed. This is every visit I had to this rheumatologist afterwards, every note and blood draw. Here you go.
All
Yep.
right. So one last fun question. If you could be like any character out of any universe, what character would you choose to be?
I don't think I could choose a character to be. I could choose a world to live in.
Okay, fine. Choose a world then.
I feel
that's
like I would
totally
like
cool.
to live in like the wizarding world. Like I think
Oh, I love
magic
that.
and witchcraft and all of that is so fun. On
I
my baby
just
shower, it's actually Harry Potter themed. So
Love it.
Yes. Actually, I just saw like a really funny meme that was like expensive petroleum and it was Harry Potter. And I was like, I mean, you're not wrong.
it's terrible. It's terrible out there. But we're very much
is.
into like a fantasy thing. So like our nursery's fantasy themed. It's like Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, and Star Wars.
I
'Cause
almost
make
did
it.
Star Wars.
I
All the
could
fun
make it
things mixed
all.
together.
Yes, I could do all Harry Potter, and my husband likes Harry Potter, but he does not have the Harry Potter passion that I have in my life. And so I was like, okay, well, we can mix in everything else, and they'll be like Fantasyland over here of all
There you
different
go.
fantasy worlds.
That's fun.
Yes,
Any
it's
final
very
ad-
gender neutral.
Oh yeah, yeah, all that stuff is general. My son loves Star Wars too. Is there any final advice advice or tips or anything you want to leave our audience with?
I don't know. I would say just advocate for yourself and always do your own research. Don't just trust what every like first doctor, every first person says. Like even as a military spouse, advocating for yourself, like no one tells you like what you're really entitled to as a military spouse. I've met so many spouses who are just like, oh well, this is how it is. I'm like, they don't know a ship has an ombudsman that you can contact if there's an emergency. I'm like, and they're not just there for emergencies. If you want resources about what's going on base, ask them. Like they know. They're trained to do this. They'll tell you. Like there are things in this world, like so many things that are out there that help people, and people don't know to utilize them because they don't know where to look or they don't try looking. Like if it's not in front of their face, they don't find it. And I
Yep.
feel like research can be annoying, but it's also like one of the best life tools you can have.
Absolutely.
Brianna and Krystyna, it's been fun. This is how to deal when shit gets real. We'll see you guys and we'll see y'all next episode.